Hello, church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. Honored to be with you, coming to you from snowy Colorado. Quite the storm the last few days, but digging out. Everything's good. Such is the nature of business in the spring here in Colorado. So it's usually the snowiest time of year for us, but it's all good. It's all good. So we are finally in our sermon series on Isaiah. And I got to tell you, we did the intro last week. If you haven't seen it, you can go back. It's not necessary unless you want to dive into verse 1 in depth a little bit more. But it is amazing how this applies to us as a country today, to the United States, and I'm sure a lot of other countries around the world. And we'll talk about that a little bit. We're not going to get too political, but we can't help but bring that in when the Bible speaks to things today as well. And so we'll talk about that. So chapter 1, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. We covered this last week. If you're interested in it, again, go back and have a look. Isaiah means the salvation of the Lord. It's an appropriate name for Isaiah. It's the prophet who's going to give the knowledge of salvation to his people and to us. So verses 2 and 3. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. Children, I have reared and brought up, but they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know. My people do not understand. This is the charge against Israel here that Isaiah is laying out. She's turned her back on God, and now she is suffering the consequences. These are the results of her disobedience. She is broken. She is desolate. And we have here, of sorts, a legal argument happening. It's a courtroom scene in a sense. Heavens and earth are called as witnesses to be a witness against Israel, against her disobedience, to hear the charges brought against her by God. But it's probably more of a personal presentation than it is a legal one, because of a couple of reasons. Mostly because of God's parental relationship with Israel. The covenant that God has made with her is here. It's in the background. When you hear these charges brought against her, you're taken back to Deuteronomy 30. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life, that you and your offspring may live. And Deuteronomy 32:1, give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. So this is all hovering in the background of what Isaiah is saying here. Israel was warned what would happen to them if they chose a path to go against God. And this is obviously the path that they have chosen. And Isaiah goes on here to support the fact that it's not a legal argument that God is making. Right? He's seen how Israel has chosen to live. The path that they've chosen goes against common decency and against common sense. Right? It's a pattern that cannot be sustained. And he says that even animals know better. The ox and the donkey know better than what Israel is doing right now. It's not just a covenant legal argument that Israel is making, though, or that Isaiah is making. This is about life. This is about the way Israel has chosen to conduct herself. Right? Sin, pride, oppression, idolatry, child sacrifices. Israel has chosen to go this way. They have chosen to live a certain type of life. They have chosen to allow certain things to be accepted that go against what God's law, covenant, and nature speaks of. And an ox and a donkey, he says, are smart enough to know who their owner is, who takes care of them, who feeds them, who tends to them. Israel, it appears, is not as wise. They're living in a way that's contrary to nature, which is why he's invited the heavens and the earth into this conversation. Or if you remember the series on Romans that we did, we talked about this. God's creation speaks of him because it operates in a specific way. It operates under the guidelines and the rules that God has set up for it. And when we, who tend to think we know better, go against those laws of nature, right, God's creation, it usually lends itself to chaos or sin or rebellion. And this is where Israel finds herself. She has chosen to go the way opposite the laws of nature, the laws that God has established in how nature works and how we are to live. In concert with that, Israel has chosen to go against that and finds herself in the dilemma she is in now. And we see this happen all the time. What happens when we go against God's order? There are all these talks with climate change and all this other stuff about darkening the sun and cutting down trees and culling animals. It's like it makes absolutely no sense. Absolutely no sense. And if the world goes down this road, I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a disaster. Well, Henry's, who's doing this? Go look it up. Go look it up. Klaus Schwab and all these people. It's not a conspiracy theory. Okay? When he writes a book called The Great Reset, it's not a conspiracy theory. When he talks about wanting people to kill their pets for climate change, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's all out there in black and white. You can go look it up. And I'm not trying to go down these roads to scare you or like this is a change of direction for the feeding station. I'm telling you what's out there. And this is going to go, all these things are going against God's natural law. And if we do this, we're going to end up in the same boat as Israel if we're not already, because we're already going against God's natural laws in other ways. But Isaiah now appeals to Israel directly. He says, look, you got to change your ways. You got to change the way you think. You have to change the way you feel. You have to change the way you act. You have to change the way you live. If you don't, the consequences will be devastating. And it's an appeal with the thought of a child in relation to his or her parent behind this, right? Because it's not just about a covenant God and his covenant people. God is Israel's father. They have rebelled against their father. And in pagan religions, you would try to appease these gods, right? These gods are looked upon as waiting to mete out punishment. Israel saw their God as a nurturing father, having the best interests for his children in mind. And so rebelling against him was unnatural because of this parent-child relationship. To deliberately disobey a God that has no power, right? But to deliberately disobey a God that had ill intentions towards you is one thing. But why would you turn your back on a God deliberately who saved you, who brought your ancestors out of Egypt, who established you as a nation, who protected you, provided for you, made you prosperous, right? It makes no sense. And Isaiah gives a picture of how incomprehensible this is. He says, neither an ox nor a donkey were considered very smart in the Near East, yet they had a clue. They had common sense to know who cared for them. Now, the people of Israel surely had to be smarter than what were considered pretty dumb animals. But apparently not. Apparently that wasn't the case, because it was demonstrated in their behavior. Their behavior said they didn't get it. They didn't have a clue, or they didn't care. And to make matters worse, Israel knew God. They knew him by experience. They saw his works firsthand when he brought them up out of Egypt. He provided for them. He fed them. He protected them. He performed miracles. He opened the sea for them. He brought water out of stone for them. He led them by a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. They had first-hand experience of God. His power and might was there for everyone to see. And it was written about and talked about and passed down through generation through generation. And all of that experience should have led the nation to submission to the one who loved them so much. He took care of them in that way. He established them as a nation, but yet here they are in rebellion. God has provided salvation for the nations now through his Son and his sacrifice on the cross. And we've, as a people, have experienced him in our own lives. And yet, here we are. Like Israel, we have refused to submit to our deliverer. So verses 4 through 9. Ah, sinful nation. I was thinking of the translation in the King James says, woe is you, sinful nation. But ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, offspring of evildoers, children who deal corruptly. They have forsaken the Lord. They have despised the Holy One of Israel. They are utterly estranged. Why will you be struck down? Why will you continue to rebel? The whole head is sick. The whole heart is faint. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but bruises and sores and raw wounds. They are not pressed out or bound up or softened with oil. Your country lies desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. In your very presence, foreigners devour your land. It is desolate as overthrown by foreigners. And the daughter of Zion is left like a booth in a vineyard, like a lodge in a cucumber field, like a besieged city. If the Lord of hosts had not left us a few survivors, we should have been like Sodom and become like Gomorrah. He describes Israel's condition in more detail. They're sinful, they're corrupt, they have forsaken God. And their action has provoked a reaction from God. They have sinfully turned their backs on God, and God has returned the favor. God is always willing to let us go our own way if that's what we so choose. This relationship with God goes both ways. You see it when it comes to the miracles of healing that Jesus performs. What's the key piece of that? I say this all the time. It's his faith, right? It's the faith of the one, when I say his faith, the faith of the one asking for the miracle. That is key. Your faith has healed you, he says. Right? How many times does he say that? So the relationship with God goes both ways. He invites us in, we seek him out, and it grows. If we decide to go our own way, God will allow us to do that. He is not the manipulator that some people believe him to be. He will allow us to go our own way if we so choose. And it's not just being about a good person, right? There is so many things tied to this relationship with God. You can be a good person, but what motivates you? Are you just doing it to look good in front of your family, in front of your friends, in front of the world? Right? That's pride. That's not true morality. Right? When we decide to go our own way, when we remove God from our lives or from our societies, from our governments, something has to fill that void. And we can come across as somebody righteous and good, but if we are divorced from God, it's a false morality. And so when the things of God are removed, something has to fill that void. And if it's not of God, the Bible tells us, then it's got to be of Satan. And Satan will fill that void that we construct when we remove God from everything. So sin, evil, corruption, it's inevitable when we remove God from everything. And that's where Israel finds herself. Leave a vacuum, something's got to fill it. It's a natural course. Right? So when you see governments or businesses or societies run in a corrupt way, in a non-godlike manner, what then is at the root of it? It can only be one thing. It has to be of Satan. It has to be. Because if it were of God, it would not be run in a corrupt, evil, sinful manner. And Isaiah lays it out right here. The absence of God in Israel has led them now on this course that they themselves have chosen. And Israel's problem is twofold. It's political and it's personal, right? God established Israel as a nation, and it was to be a light unto other nations. But politically speaking, they chose, 1 Samuel 8, they wanted a worldly king over God. And so that's what they got. And when we've gone through the Old Testament, you see how evil and corrupt those kings can be. But God is also father to his children, as we've talked about. They're not merely children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are God's children. Remember what John the Baptist said about children of Abraham in Luke 3:8. Bear fruits in keeping with repentance, and do not begin to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. For I tell you, God is able from these stones to raise up children for Abraham. Israel's sin affects them on all levels of their existence, personal and political. And what's happened is, as the family of God, they have chosen to live opposite of what God intended. Right? The descendants ought to be better than their ancestors, right? They should learn from history. They should strive to do better. They should be learning from history. They should be about life and regeneration. But that's not where things are now for Israel. They have not learned from history or have turned their backs on the lessons of history. The descendants are worse than what has come before. And they become a source of destruction and degeneration. In short, Israel's lost her way. But when you choose worldly ways over God's ways, is it any wonder why? How long have we as a nation rejected God? And we find ourselves where we are today because of that. There is no other explanation. Take God out, something will fill the void. And Satan has done it gladly. Now, the other point of this, Israel's forsaken the Lord, in whom only is righteousness found. So if you divorce yourself from God, what is the status of your righteousness? You have none. You have none. God is the Holy One. There is no other. There is no other who is holy and righteous as He is. He is the only God deserving of worship. And He is also a God of character. We talked about this in the Plan of Salvation series. God is who He is, and He must stay true to Himself. All morality comes from Him. It is defined by Him. Morality apart from Him is a cheap imitation, and that's what we talked about. Being a good person, it's fine, but it's not rooted in anything that is good if it's apart from God. So remove yourself from God, you are no longer righteous, you are no longer moral. You're doomed to unrighteousness and immorality apart from Him. And that in and of itself is an affront to God. So this moral, righteous, loving, gracious, merciful God has made a covenant with Israel. What is Israel's reaction? Casual rejection, almost. Right? This nation here, the United States, has been founded on Christian principles. Now, He didn't make a covenant with us, but the founders, and we've talked about this in the past, made a covenant with God when this nation was founded. I think God honored that, and He helped guide this nation to become what it is under His guidance. Go read the founding fathers. But where are we now? Is it casual rejection? I don't know that it's so casual. It's definitely rejection. Right? And in rejecting Him, what fills the void? For Israel, false gods and idolatry. For us, same thing, most likely. You look around, it's what it looks like to me. And here's the thing with idolatry, when you're worshiping false gods. When you're doing so, it's under the guise of manipulation, right? You're trying to entice a response favorable to you. We haven't had rain for 2 months. We'll offer sacrifices, and hopefully the rain god will bless us with rain, kind of thing. You're trying to gain a result by this, that, or the other, and you're trying to cajole a God who really doesn't exist and has no power, by the way. But you're trying to cajole that false God into a favorable reaction, right? Security through manipulation. What's the center of faith with the one true God of the universe? What are we called to do? Submit. Submit. Scary thing to give up control of your destiny, but trying to control our destiny, where's that got us? Personally and politically, where's it gotten us? Right? It's about submission. It's about accepting the gift of God's grace, being conformed to the image of His Son, becoming holy as He is holy. Can we do that ourselves? No, we can't. We have to submit. We have to submit. There is no other way. Through Christ. That's it. We have to do it. So in an attempt to control their own destiny, they deny God, and as a result, it's a shambles now. And their destiny, whether they know it or not at this point, is exile. And God warned them about that back in Deuteronomy as well. And we see evidence that Israel tried to play both sides of the fence. They tried to keep God, and they tried to keep their gods, small g. But God's not having that. Exodus 20. You shall have no other gods before me. Period. End of discussion. And trying to keep both is abandonment of God in his eyes. It's rebellion. Right? And if you go back to Deuteronomy 27 through 30 and reread those scriptures, it states very clearly what the results of rebellion will be. Live in covenant with him, be blessed. This is really the Reader's Digest version. Live in covenant, be blessed. Break the covenant, be cursed. Then Isaiah uses the metaphor of health to show the state of the nation, right? Good health is a natural state. When things are in balance and you're eating well and you're healthy, that's the way God intended it to be. Everything's working in concert with each other. But if there are injuries, if you are, there are sores, there is a disease, you have a lifestyle that leads to bad health, right? Something's obviously wrong. And then what do? You go seek help, or you have to make changes in order to fix what needs to be fixed. You need to heal what needs to be healed. You may have to change the way you live if it's a bad lifestyle, but you have to take action to heal the things that are broke. This works for rebellion, says Isaiah. Right? The symptoms of rebellion are present to see. Nation is desolate, it's barren, it's forsaken. This in and of itself should tell people that something needs to be done. Something needs to change. The nation's been beaten. They've been injured. Why? Because they've come head to head with God in rebellion, and God has reacted. And where God's sword is going to fall is up to Israel. It's their choice. This goes back to the conversation about Pharaoh and the hardening of his heart. God didn't harden his heart, and then Pharaoh didn't allow Israel to leave. Pharaoh didn't allow Israel to leave, and as a result of his actions, his heart was hardened. And this is what's happening with Israel. Israel is doing what it's doing, and as a result, it is bringing their own consequences that is deemed by the choices they make upon themselves. God has not decided to punish Israel in some arbitrary way. This is in direct result to their behavior. And this is the risk you run when you go against God's ways. Oswald, and this is, I want to mention this before, I forgot I was going to mention this at the top of the broadcast today, but I forgot. This is who we're using for this to get through Isaiah, to help us understand it a little bit more. John Oswald. This is only volume 1. This only covers chapters 1 through 39. So tells you how long this series could be. But he talks about the wrath of God. And I want to take it from his book. And I probably won't read it word for word, but I want to take it from his book so I get it right. Because he talks about the wrath of God, right? We have, sometimes when we talk about the wrath of God, we have this picture of a really angry, irate, red-faced God. And he's just waiting to smite anyone who disobeys him. But it's not an arbitrary thing. And he uses the metaphor of driving a car, right? If I'm driving a car at 100 miles an hour and I deliberately run it into a brick wall, what's going to happen? The results are going to be a natural effect on me of what I just did. I chose to drive that fast intentionally into a brick wall. The consequences of my actions are going to bring upon me the effects of my actions, right? So, same is true spiritually. If I live in contrary to God's laws of nature, I'm going to live and experience the destructive results brought on by my actions. Right? That's kind of the wrath of God. It's not him, waiting to beat somebody over the head with a Bible or a thunderbolt or whatever. Sometimes the wrath of God is just going against his common sense, the way he has designed the world to work. And this doesn't mean that God is without a caring personality, just the opposite. He is personally, intentionally involved with all of us, and he cares. And he will try to guide us out of the disastrous decisions we sometimes make. It's up to us whether we want to listen to him or not. And lastly today, Isaiah turns to the land as an example of Israel's desolation spiritually. Right? Because whether the land is desolate or not really doesn't matter. Spiritually, it is. It's a disaster zone. It's a desert. It's a wasteland spiritually at this point. And C.S. Lewis in The Problem of Pain says, it is impossible to enjoy the fruits of nature without being in submission to nature's Lord. And he talks about these harvest shelters. What were these harvest shelters in the cucumber field he's talking about? Harvest shelters, back in the day, farmers lived in the cities. And it was a distance to travel between where they lived and where the fields were. So in the time of harvest, they would build these little shacks or booths. And they would live in these things during harvest time so there wasn't any time wasted. Because it could take an hour or two to get to the fields sometime. So they would live in these shacks. Well, when the harvest was done, they didn't tear these things down. They would leave them sit. And so they would become these ramshackled, deteriorating little things, little huts out in the middle of these fields. And that's what Isaiah compares Israel to. Right? This is Israel now. God planted them, but now there are these abandoned, soulless, spiritually desolate little hovels where there is no life in them now. And it's the exact opposite of what God intended for them. But here's the cool thing about God. This is the great thing. Even in the midst of this, in the state that they're in, there's hope. Always hope with God. Right? Because she's not completely destroyed. Right? That is solely by the will of God that she has not been completely destroyed. Because he made sure of that. He could have. He could have made them like Sodom and Gomorrah, extinct is what Isaiah says. But he decided no, not to do that. Because there's still work to be done. There's still hope. The whole nation has not abandoned God. There is still a remnant who is faithful to him. And so there's hope. Isaiah believes it. There's hope for his people, for his nation, even if he doesn't live to see it. He believes it. He believes in God. He trusts in God. He knows God. He knows that God wouldn't establish a nation just to destroy it. There is some good yet to come out of this. And out of a cucumber field, God can and will do great things. But this is our state now. And I know I talked about some things that are considered conspiracy things, and I'm not going down those roads. I don't intend to. That's not my intention. But when you look at where the state of this nation is right now, I could not believe how, at least to me, this spoke of the situation here in the United States. We are adopting ways that are totally opposite of what God has told us to adopt in his word. You know what they are. I don't need to spell them out. We have pushed God out of everything. We have turned our backs on God. We have rebelled against God. Right? And we see the results for Israel. What makes us think the results for us are going to be any different? There's hope. There's always hope. There is a remnant here. There are faithful people in this nation that are praying hard every day for this nation and its people, its churches, its ministers, its priests, whatever. Its leadership, which needs a lot of prayer, right? The pastors who need a lot of prayer. Ministries, whatever it may be, right? It all needs to be covered in a canopy of prayer and hard prayer, right? Submissive prayer, submitting ourselves to God's will. But there's hope because God has nothing but good intended for all of us, right? It goes back to it's a two-way street. What is our reaction to God then? Based on that reaction, that will tell us where we're going to end up. And so for all of us, all of you out there, all of us here at the feeding station, pray. Be praying. Be praying hard. Right? Those who are on my list, prayer warriors here at the feeding station, praying hard, on your knees type of prayer. Because God can change the hearts of those who are rebelling against Him. May take some serious circumstances to do that, but better that than judgment. And so, keep the faith. God is with us, and if He is with us, who can be against us?